Hi there, Michael Volshinovich here. You can find me via the social media links below and also on my website at vibrantshot.com. Now in this video, we're going to be looking at some time-saving tips to help you speed up your retouching. So we're going to look at predominantly Photoshop with a little bit of Capture One, but the focus really is on process here and just things that you can do to speed up what is oftentimes a fairly lengthy and tedious process. So the first tip really is just focusing on preparation, and that is to be ruthless when culling. And that just basically means, don't pick images that aren't really the standout images, and don't pick more images than you need, because ultimately, the best way to save time in retouching is to not do the retouching at all. And so when it comes to culling, my focus kind of varies depending on the type of image that I'm working on. So if I'm working on a portrait image, then I know that the number one criteria really that I look for is expression. If the expression isn't good, then ditch the image, move on. And also if I'm comparing two images, ultimately I'll tend to go for the one that has the stronger expression. The other things that I tend to look for are, is the lighting good? Is it interesting? And then of course is, body positioning good? Is, kind of the shoulders, are they well positioned? Are hands well positioned? Those become important things. But number one in a portrait really is the expression. And when I'm dealing with something that is a little bit of a wider shot like this, then the criteria changes a little bit depending on, are you modeling clothing for a specific brand? Then, of course, that clothing has to look good. But I think the focus really shifts more towards, is the body positioning good? Is it interesting? Does it flatter the subject? And then secondary to that would be something like lighting, and then facial expression might be sort of a lower priority criteria. So the lighting in this case, if we look at these two images here, we can see that the lighting is obviously the same across the two images, but thanks to the fact that this hair kind of tucks in behind the face, and we can see that over here as well, it creates a more interesting lighting because it creates that contrast, that separation, where we have the lighting on the far side of the face here, separated by dark hair and then a light background. Here it becomes less interesting, even though the lighting is the same, because we don't have that hair separating and creating that contrast. So those are kind of little things that you can look for. And then the number one thing really is to establish what the criteria is for a particular look. What are your most important things? And then use that as a deciding factor. Because if you're going to retouch 6 to 7 images per look and you have 6 to 7 looks, that quickly spirals out of control and it becomes a lot of retouching. Now, once you have actually narrowed down and decided on the images you want to work on, the best way to approach things is to work in batches, in sort of an assembly line mode almost, and I'll explain that a little bit once we get into Photoshop. But the idea here is that ideally we want to bring in at least 5 to 6 images at a time, and if that is a beauty editorial with 5 or 6 distinct looks, then just bring them all in at once. Or if you've got this sort of situation where you've got 4 images with the same lighting from the same look that we need to retouch, bring them all in at the same time, and we're going to work through them sort of systematically, and I'll show you how I typically tend to work through them. So that I find helps tremendously in accelerating the process, because there's areas where you can optimize, and that is particularly acute in situations where the lighting is the same and you're going to want the color grading to also be the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in these 4 images and we're going to jump into Photoshop, and I'll talk about some optimizations there. So now that we're inside of Photoshop, we really want to take on this sort of assembly line mentality. And even though that's not maybe a positive way to think about things, generally speaking, when working at an assembly line, you're going to be working on one specific task as opposed to seeing the product through from start to finish. And the reason for that is we want to avoid this constant context switching, where we're really focused on one repetitive task that we can optimize over time. And that is the same approach for a batch of images. So for example, we want to do all of the same operations across all 4 of our selected images. And generally, as with any retouch, I always advocate starting with the rasterized changes first, and then working through things like adjustment layer-based changes, color grading to finish, and things of that nature. And so in this particular image, let's say I want to, rotate this image. I'll do that first. Then I may clean up the background, like removing something like this if I don't want it. And then I'll work through healing the image, and so on and so on. And so that is kind of the same process I would take for every single image. So the first thing I'll do is I'll clean up the background. I'll remove any distractions, remove any sensor dust, move on to the next image, repeat the same thing, then come back, work on things like liquefy across all of the images, and then come back, heal all of the images, and so on. That way I'm kind of repeating the same task over and over again across all of the images. That may not sound exciting, it may seem a little monotonous, but it does improve your efficiency and gets you through the images a lot faster. Now, once our rasterized changes are completed, be they cropping, rotating of the image, liquefying, healing, things of that nature, then we can move on to the remaining portions of the retouch, and generally that involves things like localized color adjustments, dodging and burning, color grading, and so on. And the best way to work through something like that is to essentially optimize by having a consistent layer stack. And that way you don't really have to think through the retouch. The layer stack essentially serves as your guide for how to actually work through the image. And to achieve that, you simply just create an action that builds a layer stack that works for you. And so, for example, I've done that here, and this sort of, again, serves as a template for me as to what I should consider. Perhaps I need to create some sort of localized background adjustments. I have my various dodging and burning layers that I need to perform here. I've got a section for localized adjustments within my subject. I've got sort of a starting point for color grading. I've got helpers and so on. And so by building this, for one, I'm consistently doing the same thing from image to image, and I'm not really having to think about it too much. And of course, the other benefit of doing this is that we're automating the creation of all of these layers, and so we don't have to spend the time doing it manually at the time of our retouch, because it's repetitive. It's the same thing from image to image. You may not use certain things, in which case, let's say I don't want to adjust the background, I can simply delete it, and that's it. I don't have to use that. Now, automation, of course, can find itself in many ways. That can be through, third-party plugins, actions you create. It works across various applications, like in Capture One, for example. If I want to do my dodging and burning inside of Capture One, I can simply do that using scripts. And so I've created a script here for dodging and burning. And essentially, by selecting the image I want to insert into, I can insert various dodging and burning layers here, and it will automate that stack creation for me. So if you're interested in that, you can find a link to it down in the description below. But this is just sort of an example where you can really find various places for optimization. Anytime you find yourself repeating the same task over and over again, look for ways that you can program that so that you're not manually creating these different things. And if you're not really capable of creating these things from scratch, odds are they exist somewhere out there on the internet, so they're oftentimes just a search away. Now, once we've got our layer stack established here, of course, we have to then work through the next steps, which are generally going to be something like dodging and burning. And so, again, we're going to follow the same process of dodging, burning this image. Then we're going to move on to the next image. We're going to dodge and burn that, and so on, until we've completed, step by step, worked through the retouch. Now, the final place where we can optimize by batching is through the duplication of certain elements. So, for example, color grading is a really great place to start. Because generally speaking, if you're working through a batch of images, all of these images that we've selected, we know that they're shot in more or less the same light, therefore the color temperature should be the same, and the overall look we want to achieve should be pretty similar. And so once we've color graded this image here, and we've worked through all of the adjustments that we need to make it look good, then all we need to do is just copy this particular layer. So over here, even though I've created this stack again, I can just delete it. And I can go into this one. Let's say we made some changes to saturation. So let's say we go into here. Let's say we just desaturate this image pretty dramatically. And let's say in our blacks, we take away a little bit of yellow. So we do something like this. And let's say we're happy with this particular color grade. All we have to do is right click, duplicate group, and move it into our next image. Of course, we would do that across all of the images. And we can see that the same color grade was applied here. Now, the best way to ensure this sort of repeatability of color grading is to make sure that within your color grade layers, you don't use layer masks. And that's something that I always advocate within my one-on-one sessions, is that you try and avoid the temptation to layer mask in a particular area and to really just focus on targeting either specific luminosities, be there highlights or midtones or shadows, or specific colors. So if you're using a tool like selective color, then you can really target specific colors and adjust those, and that way they can translate from one image to the next. The last thing that you can of course use as well is to use the blend if. So we can adjust what portion of the luminosity range that this particular layer gets applied to. And so again, that will just translate from one image to the next because we're not explicitly defining a layer mask. If you do end up using a lot of layer masks, then that copying and pasting, the benefit of it begins to diminish, because every time you copy and paste the group across, you have to delete the layer mask, start from scratch. So avoid that temptation. If you can work with just plain adjustment layers with no masking, you will save a great deal of time by copying across the color grade from one image to the next. Now, of course, the alternative to this is to do all of your color grading within a raw processor like Capture One at the very end. So you'll do all of your work in Photoshop with the exception of color grading, and then do the final color grade within Capture One. And that's something that we're going to actually refer back to at the end of this video. So oftentimes what I will actually do is just color grade my image to a neutral state where I've removed, specific color casts or, colors within. Let's say the skin tone is not quite where I want it to be. I'll adjust it within here to get it to a neutral place, and then this sort of more stylized color grading I'll do as a final step within Capture One. Now the next tip I have relates back to something that, again, I've seen a lot in my one-on-one sessions, and that's just people zooming in way too far on images when they're retouching them. And that's really evidenced by the layer mask they have for something like dodging and burning, which includes a lot of very minor fine strokes that are ultimately not visible by the viewer within the end product. So that was a lot of time that was spent on something that nobody will really see and hasn't really made the image that much better for the viewer. And so if we take this image as an example, we have this sort of portrait crop, I would say. And so for this kind of image, I would generally zoom in so that the face occupies a decent portion of the frame, like let's say maybe 33%. And I would probably work from there to make all of this look good. Now, I could, of course, zoom in at 100% and try and work through every little detail that we have within the skin, but that would be a lot of time wasted that nobody will see unless this is, a beauty campaign and is going to be printed as a billboard. That's probably unnecessary. So make sure that you don't get lost in the finer points on things that are just not visible to most people, because nobody's going to appreciate that time that was spent, and nobody's even going to see the result of all of your labor there. So make sure that you find a reasonable zoom level. Check your image at at a scale that people will view it at, and just make sure that you focus your efforts on things that are truly visible and don't waste time on things that aren't. Now the next tip is related to the previous one, which is to really just set yourself some reasonable time limits on your retouch. Now obviously time involved will vary depending on the shooting conditions. Was the lighting harsh? Was it soft? Did your model have good skin? Did you have a makeup artist? Did you have a hairstylist? All these things influence how much work you're ultimately going to have to do on your image. But again, creating some sort of reasonable time limit for yourself prevents you from going beyond what is really necessary to make the image look good. And I always say that dodging and burning, for example, is one of those things that definitely follows the law of diminishing returns. And so similar to that, it's sort of an 80-20 rule where 80% of the effect of dodging and burning can probably be had in 20% of the time that you're spending. And so the more time you spend on dodging and burning, you're really just creeping into diminishing returns, where it's a lot of time spent on very little effect. And in this particular image here, the dodging and burn time, if we look at sort of a before and after, and if we look at it in black and white, was probably around 10 to 15 minutes. And ultimately, most of what I wanted to accomplish was achieved in that amount of time. And so the best way to kind of gauge what that time should be is to, working through a series like this, take the first image and don't give yourself any limit. Just time yourself, see how long it took you. Then take that time and shave off 20% and try and get the next image done in that time frame. And then the next image, try and shave off another 20% and see if you can get down to, maybe half the time at least at first. Ideally, you get down to about 30% of the total time that you spend on the first image by the time you get to the last one, and then kind of compare the images across the series and see whether or not there's really a noticeable difference as you worked your way through and spent less and less time dodging and burning. Obviously, if you wanted to really scientifically work through this exercise, you'd take the same image and kind of redo the dodging and burning. But obviously, most people probably won't be interested in doing that. So as you're working through a series, at least you can try and do that. And if you find by the last image that it wasn't enough time, that you still needed more, then ultimately you can add a little bit more dodging and burning, time that, and see what the total time to completion was. But try and get that down, because odds are you're probably doing way too much of it, and you're not really getting the benefit from that extra work. Now the next tip that I have may seem obvious, and that is just to use the right tool for the problem at hand. And it's one actually that trips up a lot of people, and I see people just using the wrong tool to solve a particular problem. And there's really two different ways that you can use the wrong tool. One is you use a tool that is too simple when a better, more advanced tool exists, And on the flip side, we can use an overly advanced technique to solve a very simple problem. So an example of both of these is, let's say we want to retouch out this little stray hair that we see. Traditionally back in the day, we may have used something like the clone stamp tool to remove this, but now something like the spot healing brush, which used to not be the best tool, is actually quite competent in removing even complex things like a stray hair within a cluster of other hairs. So if we go through here, we can see that that already did a pretty good job of getting rid of the most sort of troublesome offender. And then we can go through sort of this outer portion and remove out the rest. So in this case, if we didn't know that the spot healing brush is working quite well for things like this hair now, we would have used the clone stamp tool and spent a lot more time on it. So just make sure that you stay up to date on, what tools have evolved over time and what the best tool for the job is, and whether there's something that has just improved over time. Now, the next example is sort of the opposite of that, which is using a tool that is far too advanced for a particular problem. And if we see this little lighter patch that we have surrounded by some darker areas on the forehead, I've seen people using things like frequency separation to solve these kinds of problems. And so we basically build a frequency separation stack and start painting over it. And at the end of the day, we spent a lot of time on something that is really simple. I've also seen people using the patch tool or the healing brush to solve these kinds of things. And again, all we need to do there is identify that this is a luminosity problem and grab a dodge and burn stack, burn in this middle area and dodge a little bit around it, and within a few seconds you've solved that problem. So the first step to actually picking the right tool is identifying the problem you have. Is it a luminosity problem? Is it a texture problem? Is it a color problem? And then picking the right tool. That could be something as simple as selecting an area and using an adjustment layer to change the color, or dodging and burning a particular area, or using something like the spot healing or healing brush to fix it. But again, knowing which tools work for what is incredibly important in saving yourself a lot of time. And that just comes with practice and getting familiar with the different retouching tools that are available. So now that you've saved some time on your dodging and burning and you've mastered the tools that you need to make the skin look perfect, the last thing that we typically do within a retouch is to color grade it. And so for color grading, my tip is to use style packs. And obviously there's a couple of ways that you can use them. One is to, of course, apply the style pack as it is as your final retouch, but that's not really what this tip is about. This tip is about actually using style packs to guide you in your color grading, because it really serves as a sort of example for what looks good and what doesn't, so that you're not experimenting too much with different combinations. You at least have some sort of a roadmap. So looking at my editorial styles here, I can see that if I apply this first one, it is kind of helping the skin tone to become a little bit more pleasing. Now, obviously this is applied at too high a level. By default, it applies at 100%, but if I applied this at something like 40%, it would probably take me in the right direction of skin tone. So I know that I need to desaturate a little bit, neutralize some of the green and yellows within my skin. So I could do that with hue saturation and something like selective color. And then if I kind of move through the rest, we can see that this cool summer one here actually looks pretty nice as well. Overall, kind of cooling down the image while still retaining some of the warmth in the highlights. Works really well with the blue outfit. So that is sort of a possibility that I could work towards. This one here, we can see that it's perhaps a little too retro, a little too much cyan in the image overall, and probably a little bit too much contrast as well. And then this one, we can see that, a too cool of a look for this image doesn't work either. We want to retain some degree of warmth. So kind of going to this one, again, we see that this is going in a direction that I like, where the skin is warmer. We have maybe a little bit of cyan in the midtones, a little bit of perhaps magenta in the shadows. But again, I think this one has just far too much contrast in it for this particular image. We want to keep it a little bit softer. So I think overall, this one kind of gives us a guide where, it's not too contrasty. It has a little bit of warmth and then a little bit more sort of cool in the midtones and shadows. So that's kind of what I want to replicate, perhaps with a little bit less of the coolness and a little bit more contrast. I think will be kind of the sweet spot for this final image. So again, I'm not necessarily going to use this style pack, but that has given me a guide for what I need to do. I need to warm up my highlights, cool down my shadows and my midtones, apply a little bit of contrast, and then obviously we need to neutralize the skin tones that we had within this first one. So now that we're pretty much done with our image, another tip that I recommend is to fine tune later. And what I basically mean by that is don't get too hung up on the details of making it absolutely perfect in Photoshop. Get it to a place where you think it looks pretty good. Perhaps, the level of saturation isn't quite perfect. Perhaps, you may want to add a little bit more contrast. What I generally recommend is to err on the conservative side within Photoshop. So apply a little bit less contrast than you think is perfect, and desaturate a little bit less than you think is perfect, and then leave that until the very end, because what we can ultimately do is, once we're done inside of something like Capture One, we can go to our output folder. Here is our completed set of images, and we can then compare our series to see, are they consistent? Are some too contrasty versus the others? Are some overly saturated compared to the others? Do we want to add additional contrast by, pumping up the highlights, or darkening down our shadows, or just desaturate them all? So all that little fine tuning is probably best left until the very end, when you have all of your images completed and you want to retain some level of consistency. I mean, generally, you're probably not going to want a series of images where some are super contrasty, some are not contrasty at all, some are, desaturated heavily, some are more saturated. You're going to want some level of consistency. And generally, if you're working in batches of looks, you're not going to achieve that one look at a time. You'll want to kind of take a more holistic view of all of your images. So my point is, don't get too hung up on making it perfect in Photoshop. Just get it to a good place, but one that you can fine tune later. So save that until the very end. Now, related to this is also my last hint, and that is to export once. Again, this kind of goes back to when I was exporting a lot of things out of Photoshop. I would export the image as soon as I completed it, so I tried to fine-tune the image, make it all perfect, and then export it all. And this was kind of a process because I had to do a black and white version. I wanted various crops, so doing this took a long time. And what I oftentimes found is that by the time I get to the end of the series, I'll perhaps change direction a little bit. I'll want to adjust something, fine-tune it, so I'll have to go back, repeat all of my exporting. And so to save ourselves a lot of time, what we just need to do is do our exporting at the end. Grab all of our completed images and then export them in one shot using our process recipe. So in something like Capture One, we can just grab this and say, I want to export it as a JPEG, 3600 pixels on the long edge. If I want to create a black and white version of any of these, I can really easily do that. Like, let's say I want this one here. I can just create a variant of this particular image. So we'll clone variant there. And let's say I want to create a black and white version. So I'm just going to actually use a style pack for that. Let's say I want to grab this one here. And so I want to now export a black and white version and a color version. And similarly, maybe I want a tighter crop of this. So again, I can just clone variant, crop, and then we can create a tighter crop of this image. And we can rotate, do whatever we need to with it in order to make that look good, as sort of a variation that we can give either to your client or to the model for our portfolio, whatever it might be. So it's really easy to create this at the very end and save yourself the trouble of exporting it individually inside of a tool like Photoshop. Just wait until you're completed, all the images are fine-tuned, and then do one batch export right at the very end. So that is all of the tips that I have. This is sort of what I've done over time, what I've learned works best for my workflow. If you have any other tips of things that have worked really well for you, make sure you chime in the comments so everybody can see those. But I do hope you found these helpful, and as you try and put these into practice, hopefully they do end up saving you quite a bit of time. And overall, I think the biggest tip that I have really is just setting yourself time limits, because so many people spend way too much time obsessing over details within an image that most people don't see. Just remember that you, as the photographer or the retoucher, probably have the keenest eye out of anybody looking at these images. So things that you spot, most people probably won't. And so perfection isn't necessarily what you always need to aim for. There's always a middle ground that looks natural, that still creates an image that is engaging. And any flaws that are there are probably visible only to you and very few others. So again, hope you enjoyed this video, and we will see you in the next one. Bye for now.